Welcome to IVF This, episode 174, IVF and Functional Freeze. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. After 10 years of primary and secondary infertility due to both male and female factor infertility, I am now the mother to 3 beautiful miracles. I am married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you how to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, 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 my beautiful friends. I hope you are all doing so well today. I'm really excited to talk about this concept because if you listened to my last episode, you know that I've been out for a couple of months, kind of recovering from my own burnout. And with the work of my therapist and myself, I have noticed how often I am in functional freeze. So it's a deeply personal episode, but also an episode that I think is going to be very enlightening for someone who's maybe not familiar. I think we're all kind of familiar, at least tangentially, with the idea of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So this is kind of an offshoot of the freeze portion of the stress responses. So I'm really excited to talk about it because I think it's pretty unfamiliar, but I think it will resonate with a lot of you guys. So this episode is for anyone who feels stuck, overwhelmed, or paralyzed by the emotional roller coaster of infertility and IVF. So we'll talk about what functional freeze is, how it shows up in the context of infertility, why we experience it, because I think it's really important to provide your brain that context. It helps us to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. It also, I think, by understanding what we do and why we do it, it also lessens the judgment that we have about ourselves and our behaviors. And most importantly, I'm going to give you a couple of ways to regulate your nervous system, because functional freeze is a consequence of an unregulated or a dysregulated nervous system. So I'm going to give you 2 really cool techniques to help regulate your nervous system. They're not big things. They're things that you can do kind of in the privacy of, if you're just alone in a room or your office or whatever, you can just do them anywhere. So by the end, again, my hope is always that you have new language to understand your body and your emotions, and a couple of actionable things that you can do to help. So let's dive in. Functional freeze. Imagine your stress response like a seesaw. On one side, you've got fight or flight, which is your body's natural way of gearing up to face or escape a threat, right? And on the other side, there's freeze. There's also fawn, which we've talked about in previous episodes. It's people pleasing, but it's not relevant to this conversation. I just didn't want someone to be like, well, actually, there's another one. But on the other side of that seesaw is freeze. And that is where your body shuts down in response to feeling overwhelmed or you're unable to act. So functional freeze kind of sits somewhere in the middle of that seesaw, right? So it's not as dramatic. And I wouldn't know anything about dramatic. It's not as dramatic as total immobilization. It's still very real and very impactful. So it's like you're physically present and going through all the motions, but emotionally, mentally, you're stuck or you're even checked out, right? It's like an internal pause button has been pressed and you're moving through life on autopilot. Maybe you find yourself saying, I'm just so overwhelmed, I can't even think straight. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do, but it feels like nothing really matters. Functional freeze is different from simply being tired or distracted. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Functional freeze is different from simply feeling tired or distracted. It is a state where your brain and your body is overwhelmed, leaving you feeling disconnected from your emotions, from your surroundings, and sometimes, a lot of times, from yourself. It can feel like being in a fog or watching your life happen from a distance, or almost like you're watching it on a movie screen, right? You're just watching it play out. You're not actually living in it. And it can show up in a lot of different ways throughout your life. And even though I'm going to talk about this within the context of IVF, if you've experienced functional freeze before, you probably will have seen this come up in other ways
in other contexts, right? So the first one that's really, really clearly functional freeze is decision paralysis, right? You know, the moments when you're like staring at your clinic's recommendations for next steps, whether it's another retrieval, a transfer, switching protocols, adding new medication, whatever. It's just like you can't make a choice. You honestly, even though maybe you're an advocate for your care, you know exactly what you want previously, maybe you're just desperate for someone to tell you what to do, right? Functional freeze can make every decision feel impossible, or like it's got the weight of the entire world on it. And no matter what you pick, it's not going to be the quote unquote right one, right? Another example would be emotional numbness. And I think a lot of us, any amount of time spent on this journey, you're susceptible to emotional numbness. But have you ever tried to attend an appointment or given yourself a shot and you just feel like you're going through the motions? Like, I'm just doing the thing. I'm neither here nor there. I'm neither up nor down. I'm just beige, just blah. Maybe it's not that you feel like any longer the high hopes or the low fears. You're just you're kind of in a flat emotional state. Beige is how I've always described it. Like, the color beige is just, eh. That's how I describe functional freeze. You're just beige. You're just black. That is functional freeze. Your brain is trying to protect you from the emotional overwhelm of the constant uncertainty and potential disappointments. Avoidance, no one can do avoidance like your girl does, okay? It's kind of like procrastination on tasks like scheduling appointments, researching clinics, or even like going through your patient portal to check results. But it might also be you thinking, I'll deal with it tomorrow, right? But tomorrow never comes and the avoidance cycle repeats. Honestly, if you are neurodivergent or neurospicy in any way, avoidance is going to be like second nature for you. So that's usually one of my prevailing flags to notice. It's like, oh, when I avoid something, I'll deal with that tomorrow. And it's like a simple task that I could do in 5 to 10 minutes. That's sometimes my dashboard indicator light, like, oh, that's your check engine, Em. Something's going on there. So it might be for you too. Overfunctioning. One of my favorite people in the entire world, she's one of my closest friends, overfunctioning. Actually, the two of my closest friends in the entire world, my best friend and this other person, overfunctioners, constant overfunctioners. And I know it sounds counterintuitive to what I've talked about, but functional freeze can show up as hyper busyness, right? It can, you can have the flip side. It doesn't have to look one way or the other, but it's kind of like you're channeling all your energy into organizing medications, meticulously tracking your cycles, or researching endlessly. It can feel and seem productive, but oftentimes it's just a way to avoid sitting with the emotional weight of what you are going through. A lot of my clients talk about this, the loss of joy. Things you used to enjoy, spending time with friends, hobbies, even dreaming about your future family, might feel so out of reach and so unrealistic that it is a complete loss of joy. Functional freeze can drain your ability to connect with what brings you joy because your nervous system is in hyperdrive, trying to shield you from pain. So I've talked a little bit about, but I want to explain why. Remember, I do believe that if I can explain to you why you do what you do, hopefully you're not as judgmental. Hopefully you're not as hard on yourself when you do it, when you notice yourself doing it. Honestly, why we do it lies entirely in how our nervous system is designed to handle stress. Okay. So the first thing is the chronic stress response. Our bodies are really, really, really good, like finely honed machines at responding to short-term stress. Think about when your heart races, when you slam on the brake to avoid like a car accident. The problem is that IVF is not a short-term stressor. It's a prolonged, sometimes chronic stressor of cycles of hope, uncertainty, and disappointment that your body perceives as an ongoing threat. And it's really important that you understand when I say an ongoing threat, like a threat to your survival is how your brain interprets any threat. psychological, physical, emotional. It is always like the perceived threat is I will die, right? There's no gradation in our mind that, oh, this is just like emotional stress. No, your brain interprets it all the same. Okay. So this constant cycle of your body perceiving this ongoing threat over time, your nervous system is like, absolutely not. I'm done messing around. And it shifts into functional freeze as a way to conserve your energy and to protect you. Like it's a very protective thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a survival adaptation. But it will limit your ability and your capacity to handle the stress that you're under. Grief and loss. Woo! Grief and loss. One of the fastest ways to functional freeze. Okay. And I mean, IVF and infertility brings layers of grief and loss. Grief over unmet expectations, failed cycles, the vision of the family that you have in your mind and your heart. And when you go through it enough, it can feel like it's increasingly out of reach, right? And this compounded grief can overwhelm your emotional capacity, leading to your body to shut down to avoid processing it all at once. There's a psychological term called the gating phenomenon or something like that. It's basically, I want you to imagine like a castle gate in olden times, right? The gate comes down and it's impenetrable, right? It's a large steel trapdoor gate sort of a thing. And that's what your body is doing. It's dropping the gate so that all the inputs don't have to come in and you don't necessarily have to deal with what's inside the gate, right? It's just there, it's living, it's ever present, but your brain has just shut it down. That's functional freeze. A lack of control, which is a massive, massive point of pain and uncertainty during IVF. But that's also a reason that we experience functional freeze is we feel a massive lack of control. Now, our idea of control is often misplaced. Like we want control over the outcome, which is something we don't necessarily have control over. So we tend to focus on outcomes that we want to control. And that's where a lot of our anxiety and control link is. But there's other forms of control, right? That we don't necessarily think about as much as outcomes, but like how your body is going to respond to the meds. Will your embryos form and develop? Will the transfer work? This lack of control can trigger feelings of helplessness, which is another key driver of functional freeze. And I don't know about you guys, but I felt helpless many, many times in many, many different scenarios throughout the IVF and infertility journey that I was on. And I was on it for 10 years. It took me 10 years to get the family of my dreams. And throughout that process, the ebb and flow of helplessness was real. It was a real experience. And finally, the emotional overload. IVF and infertility comes with a relentless emotional load. Hope, disappointment, anxiety, guilt, shame, jealousy, resentment, all of it. When these emotions pile up without relief, without the ability or the space or the bandwidth to process them, the opportunity to process them, your brain just decides it's safer to hit the pause button. Just pause. The gate comes down. We're done. We're checking out. We'll go through the motions. We'll do the things. We won't bed rot. You know, we're not going to close our drapes and crawl into bed for weeks at a time. We'll do that emotionally, right? We might not do that physically. We'll still go to work. We'll still go to appointments. You know, we'll show up to events. We'll do stuff, but everything's going to feel muted. Everything's going to feel almost like you're not really existing there. You're present. You're physically present, but you're not there, right? And those are all symptoms of functional freeze, which in its truest essence is a form of nervous system dysregulation. So I'm going to give you two methods for regulating your nervous system. These are two that I use. I find them very helpful. And it's all designed to offer you like a gentle-ish way of breaking out a functional freeze, right? I'm not trying to, this isn't like a scaregoat sort of a thing where, you know, I startle you and you fall to the ground. That's not how we want to regulate our nervous system, right? There are massive shocks that happen to our system that cause us dysregulation. Massive shocks to our system will not help us regulate, right? They're different functions. So functional freeze keeps energy trapped in your body. So making movement is one of the best ways to shake yourself out of the stuck state. So this is called the shake it out exercise, and it is exactly what it sounds like. You can even, put on Taylor Swift or anyone. Didn't Shakira have a shake it out song or something to do with that? I know her hips don't lie, but I'm not sure about the shake it out. But anyway, the idea is that it's an exercise that mimics the way that animals shake off stress after a freeze response. So if you've ever seen animals that play dead, like possums, it's probably the first one that comes to my mind. when they're in a stressful state, they get up and they kind of shake. Or if like you have a dog or a cat and they've been playing around and maybe they're getting a little bit too elevated, they'll shake their bodies as a way for them to burn off the cortisol and adrenaline that comes with the stress responses, right? So this is how you do it. I'm going to read it off to you, okay? So it's 6 steps, really easy. I want you to start with your hands, extending your arms, and I want you to shake your arms vigorously for 10 to 15 seconds. When I say vigorously, my vigorously is probably going to be different from yours. If you have injuries or something that prevents you from like just shaking the absolute crap out of yourself, that's fine. Just do it whatever feels comfortable, but kind of challenging for about 10 to 15 seconds. You move to your, so that's your hands, right? You're shaking them vigorously for 10 to 15 seconds. And then I want you to move to your arms. Let the shaking travel up your arms and your shoulders and just notice the tension loosening as you go. Then you shake your legs, right? That's the next one. You stand up and you gently bounce your knees by shaking your legs and your feet. Then you start to engage your whole body. I want you to let yourself move freely, shaking your arms, legs, torsos, like you're shaking off water, like you're coming out of the pool and you're shaking off water like an animal, right? And then you focus on deep breathing and release. I want you to take a deep breath in, hold it for a moment, then exhale with an audible sigh or sound. So that can be like if you take a deep breath and you kind of have a whew, sort of a thing, right? The sound can also be humming, right? You can do a little bit of a light hum, like sort of a thing, right? That is all in service. I know it sounds silly and it definitely looks silly if you were to look at me while I was doing it, but it is all in service to regulating your nervous system. And then kind of the last step is pause and notice. Just stand still for a moment. Just noticing, just feeling the tingling or the warmth in your body. That is the energy that is moving, that needs to move. And you can rinse and repeat as many times as you feel it necessary. You can do it as many times a day as you feel necessary. But the idea is you're not shocking your system. You're not going out for a 10-mile run or anything like that. You're just gently trying to move through some of the movements, some of the hormones, some of the chemical happenings in your brain, in your body, to gently work through them, okay? The idea of the shaking helping to discharge, that might be the best word, excess stress hormones, it unlocks stuck energy, that stuckness that we talked about in your nervous system, right? It signals to your body that it is safe to move again and starts to re-engage your connection with your physical self. You're not going to necessarily bounce out of functional freeze by doing this one time, right? But if you can build in a system where you check in with yourself maybe once a day, maybe that's all it takes, right? When you first get up, at some point after a meeting, maybe after lunch, before you go to bed, no matter when you do it, it is going to be beneficial. I promise you. And then the second one, which is similar, it's still using physical sensations to help release some of that tension, is called the press and release grounding exercise. So again, when you're in functional freeze, your body's going to feel a little bit numb. So applying deep and intentional pressure can bring about like awareness back to your physical self and provide you a sense of stability. So you do this, you find a wall or a solid surface, right? It can be your desk or floor, whatever. And you're just going to stand or sit next to a sturdy surface, wall, desk, floor, etc. And you're going to press your hands against the surface, right? You're pushing firmly as if you're trying to move the wall or surface just slightly, right? Just feeling resistance. You don't have to Hulk out, just enough to feel resistance. And you're going to hold for 10 to 15 seconds, engaging whatever muscles you are engaging with, and noticing the tension in your arms, shoulders, and back. And then you slowly, I'm not great at slowly. I want you to be great at slowly release the pressure, letting go gently and allowing your arms to just drop. And then you repeat this process with your feet. If you're standing, you press your feet firmly to the floor, kind of pushing downward like you're rooting yourself into the ground. And then just like with the shake it off one, the last step is always going to be, you're going to exhale and notice. You're going to take a breath and then just observe any changes in sensation, right? The idea is that you want to feel a little bit of a release, a little bit of ease. And that's the feeling that we want to make you really familiar with, so that when you're in a more dysregulated state, you can tell yourself, oh, wait, I remember what it feels like to feel that release, and I want to go back to it. And these are two things that I know Emily has told me that I can do to help me get back to that state of feeling that regulated, just feeling regulated, okay? And this works in a very similar way. It's a fancy word to activate the, I think it's proprioception, right? Anyway, it's your body's sense of where it is in space, right? Where it is in relation to the things around you. So it provides a deep grounding experience, which helps your nervous system regulate, right? It helps you feel more secure, more regulated. And it can also mimic comforting aspects of like deep pressure massage, deep pressure therapy, or even progressive muscle relaxation. And I actually have a whole episode on progressive muscle relaxation if you're interested. But that is what I have for you today. If you're in functional freeze, I hope you find this to be helpful. Try those grounding exercises. But more than anything, I just want you to be able to notice when you feel like that detachment, when you feel that emotional numbness, and know that it doesn't mean anything about you. All it means is that your brain is done. Your brain and your body are at max capacity and you need a break. And so hopefully with one of these grounding exercises, or if you already have a grounding exercise that you love, maybe the butterfly tap. If I'm really dysregulated, I have to like pound on my chest and almost scream. It's super, it can be very off-putting for someone who hears it or sees it. But I find that that's one of the fastest ways to regulate myself. I need like vigorous movement to regulate myself. That's not the case for everyone. So I wanted to offer you these more gentle aspects because I find that if you're newer to like nervous system regulation, this is going to be more helpful to you than just banging on your chest like I do and screaming to the heavens. But I hope you find this helpful. That this is what I have for you this week. As always, and I'm going to start saying this hopefully with every podcast episode, as always, I want you to be wildly gracious and stupidly patient with yourself. That is where you will find relief. That is where you will find grounding. That is where you will find release. All right. So that is my hope for you. I hope you have a wonderful week and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.